Public Safety Committee to order. Oh, hang on. Thank you. Thanks to Hillary looking after me. Going to call the meeting of the Special Public Safety Committee meeting to order. Our clerk today is Ms. Gurry. And is there any introduction of late items? No introduction of late items. Could I please have a motion to the adoption of agenda as presented? Moved by Jennifer, seconded by, okay, you got to move. I can't remember your first name. Kevin, that's what I thought. Okay, Kevin. All in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Seeing none opposed, we'll move on to reports. And our first report is Draft Public Safety Committee Teamwork Plan. It's going to be introduced by Ms. Gurry, who's the Director of Legislative Services. But before we do that, I would like to introduce you to our new Deputy Clerk of Corporate Services, correct? Nicolina Ricard. She comes to us from Coquitlam, lots of experience, so we were lucky to grab her. So thank you for being here, and we look forward to working with you. Ms. Gurry?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, I'd just like to echo we're extremely grateful to have her and very lucky. So welcome, Nicolina. The report in front of you today is your draft Public Safety Committee team work plan. So as you're all aware, at your last meeting on June 12th, 2024, you met and had a roundtable discussion on your work plan and identified key priorities and initiatives. Arising from that discussion, 6 themes were identified, which are noted in the report. And for each of the theme, the committee identified several potential priorities and initiatives and referred them to staff to review and incorporate into a formalized draft work plan for your consideration, which is in front of you today. So Nicolina is going to walk the committee through that attached plan and focus on the first 3 columns identified, the theme that was identified by the committee, the work plan item identified by the committee, and the committee's scope, just so you can walk through all of those. When reviewing the work plan, it's important for the committee to keep in mind what the committee's mandate was outlined in your terms of reference, and to discuss concerns and to propose solutions that would serve to enhance safety and security within the city of Nanaimo, which is outlined in that mandate and in those terms of reference. There was a couple of the priorities and initiatives that were identified by the committee that did not meet the scope and or mandate that was set out in your terms of reference and or the jurisdiction of the city. So those have been highlighted in the chart, and we can go through and have discussion. As well, we have staff, as you noted, Chair, we have the fire chief, we have Mr. LaBerge, we have the inspector from the RCMP here to help answer any questions as we go through. And so looking forward to the committee's discussion and going through that work plan. So I'll turn it over to Nicolina now, unless you have any questions for me.
Any questions from the committee? No, thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'll get right into it. I would just like to note that I'm hoping today for our discussion to focus more so on the items that are potentially within the committee scope, and hopefully we can review the ones that are confirmed as being in the committee scope a little bit more promptly, just in the interest of time and to ensure that there is sufficient discussion time for the committee. Starting with the first item, it's under the transportation safety theme, and the committee has identified for this theme improvement of safety of transit stop locations. And there is a possibility for staff to invite Regional District of Nanaimo Transportation Services Senior Manager to provide a presentation to the committee. This item is identified as being potentially within the committee scope, depending on the exact details that the committee wishes to focus on. Staff have noted that the matter could be cities or regional districts' responsibility. So, for example, transit stops are under city's jurisdiction, and the committee may identify problem locations and discuss design and safety improvements. So just wondering if there are any comments, questions, suggestions in terms of this item.
Any comments from any of the committee members? Just ask you to put up your hand. Colin?
Yeah, I just had, I don't.
Oh, yeah, the mics.
Sorry, I see it's listed as being potentially in the scope. I think irrespective, I think there's things that should be in our scope related to transportation safety, even though it's RDN, it's still, like, there is no public safety committee for the RDN, so.
I think the issue is that our council can't direct the RDN, so any motion that comes out of here has to go to our council. What we could do, though, is make a recommendation from the council and then send it to the RDN for discussion.
Yeah, I think an example that had come forward to me is that, there are some problem bus stop locations. Specifically, the Newcastle Community Association has asked city transportation staff to deal with 2 bus stops on Terminal Avenue, one in front of the Ramada Inn and another in front of Adams Tools, formerly Midlands, by removing glass and benches. So that is in RDN, not city?
Some bus stops are RDN and some bus stops are city. So we have to do with each location and see, is this a city bus stop or is it an RDN bus stop? That's the issue, right? But when our staff identifies that, if those belong to the RDN, they will forward it to the RDN. And normally what should happen, and I've never seen it not happen, is the RDN will also copy the, whoever sent the email saying, yes, this is within the RDN, and I forward it to them, you can expect a reply from them. So that's our normal procedure.
Okay, thanks.
Any other comments from the committee? James?
Yeah, just I guess a question about what our purpose here today is. So we're going over the ones that are potentially, are we just looking to identify if we want to stick with that as one? Like, is that part of is that the conversation we're having?
Yes, to confirm that the information is provided here as some suggestions for discussion, et cetera, reflect the committee's desire when this item was originally identified. And if not, then the item could be potentially removed in order to finalize the work plan at the next meeting.
Thank you.
So I'll be asking after we've had our discussion, is this a high, low, or medium priority? Kevin?
Sorry, this is way too fancy for me. I just think we should be mindful of avoiding duplication. Like, we don't need to have the same discussion on every item point, right? Like, prevention of crime falls under a number of things. If that relates specifically to safety at a bus stop, say, I'm not putting it out there, but say we were talking about cameras or something like that, and in high, risk areas or something, there's no point in having the discussion separately for bus stops and then again for crime prevention or some other aspect, so.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Jennifer?
Yeah, I had a bit of a global reaction to some of the comments about whether or not it was in the committee scope, because, so much of this, which we've covered in previous meetings, is really problems that municipalities shouldn't be dealing with. So, I mean, probably 3/4 of these items, we could say, well, this is actually a provincial problem, this is actually a federal problem, but I feel pretty strongly that to the extent that we can do something in an area, even if it's just passing a motion, with the example of bus stops, passing a motion to ask council to suggest it to the RDN, then I think that we should really do that. We could take out just about all of it. I mean, the one that really jumped out at me was creation of the warming centers. Why are municipalities doing warming centers?
Well, when we get to that, we'll discuss that.
But I really struggled to make a differentiation on the basis of, to the extent that it is a public safety issue, to make a differentiation about whether or not it's within the committee scope or not, because it's also within the jurisdiction of some other entity. I mean, it may limit what we can do practically. I appreciate that.
I think one of the things you're going into, it's a political discussion too, right? Because I'm with you, but there's others on council that think we should be doing it. So
Right.
that's where you come in. Like, for me, that's a total provincial download. I don't think tax dollars should be used towards it, but
Right.
we get outvoted, right? So
But as
that,
far as what the committee is, sorry to interrupt you, as far as what the committee is doing, we can make that recommendation
Gurry?
and then it's up to council.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and to the committee member. I think more of the scope mentioned in this chart and for the committee is what's outlined in your terms of reference. So that's the scope that it's referring to. And the scope for committees would be making recommendations to council on things that are within council's jurisdiction, and the jurisdiction matter would come more from the community charter. That's where it's going to. And then above and beyond that, which is what I think you're getting to and what you and Councillor Armstrong are talking about, would be more of the advocacy, like I think you're speaking to, is the advocacy efforts that we could do as the city.
So I agree with what you said about the scope issue, and I took the opportunity to review what the terms of reference are, which is why inserted the caveat to the extent that it's a public safety issue, and it meets those criteria, it would be within the scope of the committee. For example, with respect to bus stops, I have had community members also raise the issue of specific bus stops that they're concerned about, that's a public safety issue in Nanaimo, and to my mind, that is clearly within the scope of what the terms of reference are. Whether or not we and then larger political levels can do about it is a different matter.
Well, in the terms of that, what we can take action, like we have had like the bus stop removed at Dufferin Place because it was causing so many problems. So that was an action that can be done. Like it might be that you recommend that this bus stop be removed, or it might be a recommendation, do we look at a better design that's not going to encourage this type of behavior? So I think what we should do is try to stick to each topic first and then bring it up there if you think it's, because I imagine even at this table, you're going to get conflicting views of whether we should be doing warming centers or not, right? So it's, I think we need to stick to this, and then as it comes up, you can say your thoughts. I don't think we should be doing this because it's provincial matter or download or whatever, right? So, and then we'll just go to the vote that way. Kevin?
So is anyone else first?
No, your mic.
Just want to make sure nobody else it's my second
No,
time speaking.
thank you, I
but,
appreciate that.
Just because there's a proposal here to invite RDN staff to come and, I always struggle with a committee like this where I don't know what I don't know, right? So if there's already a plan in place or there's something that might inform the discussion, maybe better to have that ahead of time so that we're not, again, duplicating things or, coming up with something where maybe there's a 6 months of work that's already been done somewhere that we don't.
Yeah, we discussed that at our pre-meeting, and the thing is, if that comes up, because I sit on the transit committee, Hillary's up to board on it at the RDN, we can tell you that is being done, or you know what, that's already been done, so, because I agree with what you're saying, but there may be somewhere we're not able to because we don't sit on those committees, but I think that's going to be few and far between, but it's a very valid point, because a lot of stuff has been done here that a lot of people aren't aware of, and we did try and send out a lot of the links to a lot of the stuff that we've done around that, like that you guys got about, 3 months ago, I think, the links with, Christie's plan for the upriver, upstream, downstream stuff that was sent out, Dave's CSO stuff, so, yeah. Okay, so now would you like us to say, do we want to see this as a low, medium, or high priority?
That would be helpful in terms of assisting staff with whether it's achievable within the committee's term or not. Yes, thank you.
Any thoughts on where you see this?
I'd prefer to wait till we've done all of them. and then-
Okay, we'll come back. Okay, that's good for me. Is everybody in agreement with that? Seeing nobody disagreeing, we'll do that. Thank you, Doug. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one, which is under the crime prevention.
Thank you. So the first item identified under that theme is the community safety officers patrols in the school system. And staff have identified here that this is not within the committee's scope. The committee may provide recommendations for enhancing public safety and security. However, this particular matter may be in the RCMP jurisdiction. And it's noted that the school districts are within the provincial jurisdiction and the schools are responsible for determining safety measures within their facilities.
And just as you know, there is a very active school liaison program here. In my opinion, it's a very good school liaison program supported by the school district, which is great, because a lot of places aren't. The other issue that, just so you're aware of, the community safety officers are already stretched too thin to take on any more duties, correct, Mr. LaBerge? Yeah, so there will be an upcoming report to council on whether that program gets extended and expanded upon, so we'll talk about that after. So we can take the SLO stuff out that's being dealt with by RCMP. And if you do want updates, if there's issues or whatever, all you have to do is send an email to myself and Hillary, and we'll make sure that Eric or somebody from the RCMP is here to provide us an update of what's going on. Any other concerns around the school? Okay, seeing none, we'll go on to CCTV, please.
For that item, staff have noted that it falls within the committee's mandate and that the committee may identify preferred locations, keeping in mind privacy limitations and legislation.
Any discussion around that one? No? Okay, moving on then to the next, please.
Next item is avoiding closures and relocation of businesses due to crime and social disorder. And this does fall within the committee's scope in a sense that the committee may provide recommendations on crime prevention measures to improve business safety.
Okay, Mr. Collin?
I just wanted, just for clarity, in the minutes here, to I hope that included under this item, we have something related to the motion passed on June 17th that city staff are preparing a report regarding options to regulate vacant properties. We're, as a committee, I think that like this falls in under this avoid closure relocation of businesses, with vacant properties being a significant concern for safety of surrounding businesses.
So
and
that would
homes.
be another thing that this is probably going to have to be in an advocacy piece, because right now the city, in my opinion, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Chief Doyle or Mr. LeBerge and Ms. Scurry, we're doing everything that the community charter allows us. You can't compare us to Vancouver because they have their own community charter, so they set their own things, but right now our vacant, well, it goes under, a lot under the fire, and we're doing everything, maybe Chief Doyle, you could take it, because you know what we're doing, and Mr. LeBerge, for the vacant properties.
Why don't you go first, I'll follow.
Vacant properties, Dave. Vacant properties, they're saying that we want to push it. I said, but I believe that in my opinion, our city's doing everything that we're allowed under the community charter. The rest would need a change by the provincial government.
Well, Chair, I can.
Mike?
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Hilary.
Maybe. Thank you, Chair. I can advise the committee that council requested a report on vacant property bylaw options. Staff are preparing that. We'll be taking it to council later. So probably what I would recommend is allow council to receive that report, and if there's any follow-up that they would like this committee to consider, that would probably be the best avenue here.
So then that would be a recommendation from council to refer to the committee.
And I just have one other point as well
Okay.
to make. Just in this same line, under the avoid closure relocation of businesses, there's a statement in the related ongoing or completed projects initiatives that the city supports neighborhood associations as an intermediary and to address and mitigate the impact of homelessness on residents and businesses. This, I don't understand the statement, but it sounds, when I read this, it sounds like the city thinks that because it supports neighborhood associations, it's on the neighborhood associations to mitigate the impacts of homelessness on residents and businesses. I hope that's just not written well.
I gotta see, where are you finding that one here? Third point?
Page 7.
Okay.
It's on the last.
I think what, and again, I could, please correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Gurry or Ms. Ricard. Part of that is that by supporting the neighborhood associations, they can call in, they can address concerns, we can help deal with that. We might look at good neighborhood agreements for like a new supportive housing unit or something. That is that what you're trying to capture, that by supporting the neighborhood associations and getting that relationship, they can refer issues to us? Is that what you're looking at?
Madam Chair, yes, my interpretation is that they are one of the partners that the city has in terms of addressing the issue.
Yeah, I might suggest that that statement should be rewritten, just because it doesn't, I don't think it captures the spirit of what is being trying to convey. It sounds more like I think what the city is trying to say is that the city supports neighborhood associations and empowering them to come forward with these concerns,
Okay.
so that their rights as citizens can be protected.
Yeah, because it does look like we're asking them to address and mitigate it, so that's a very valid point. So we'll just put that the city supports neighborhood associations as a partnership in helping us address the impact of homelessness on the residents and businesses. Jennifer?
My thoughts on this item were mostly about data gathering. So when you read the newspaper, you frequently see a business owner who says, you know, I've had this many break-ins, I've replaced this many windows, I've made this many claims. Or some business owners that I talk to, they don't really want to interact with the RCMP on it because it's going to be a big hassle, or maybe they've stopped making claims because their premiums are too high. So I'm interested to know what we can do on the side of data gathering, even if it's just a portal for people to report interactions that they've had that are affecting their business. that may not necessarily turn into action by the city, but just so that you get a more accurate picture of what's going on than what might be reported to
I know one
emergency
thing that the RCMP is working on is they're really encouraging people. We need you to call it in regardless of whether you think you're gonna get action, because everything does go by stats, let's be honest, right?
Yes.
So they need to do it, if they're unhappy with how the RCMP's responded, there's mechanisms that they can go up the chain of command, like, you know, Eric's here, if he hears, like, you know, if we get it, what happens quite often when we get complaints about the RCMP, we refer them to Inspector Burton right now, he's the acting superintendent, or whoever's in charge, and they can deal with that. But the problem is, if people don't report crimes, then we don't know they happen. And we have to have proper reporting, not a city website, because we don't have staff to deal with that. So the RCMP is structured that way. We do get reports regularly from the RCMP to show the accurate, you know, how many calls they get on this and that. That's done regularly by the RCMP, but I don't believe it's sent out to the public.
What I'm trying to say is that there's a gap beyond those RCMP statistics, right?
Well, I understand that.
I did start
Yeah.
regularly
Yeah.
calling into the
Yeah.
RCMP
Yeah.
for things that might be a crime. But I'd be reluctant to call the RCMP to say that my staff are scared to walk to the parking lot. That's not.
But that's where you use their online tool, right? There's a lot of companies that will use there's an online reporting that doesn't have a suspect, just to say, you know, we're concerned about this, so they do it on the online reporting tool. But maybe we need to get more advertisement about the online reporting tool. Because I know what you're saying, because we know for a fact there's a lot more fires happening downtown that get reported.
Yeah.
We know that.
Well,
And the fire chief knows that.
It may not be something that is worth reporting in that
But
official sense.
this is where the problem comes in. You may think it's not worth reporting, but then all of a sudden we find out there were 7 within this area, we got a fire bug.
Exactly.
That's why we need to do, maybe what we should be looking at is a better communication plan on how to get people to report crimes. I think that is what you're asking for, because then we can have proper data collecting. Scott?
I know that there's a huge gap between victimization data and the actual, like the dark figure of crime. We know that that's a major issue, but I guess I know it's definitely underreported in many
100%.
categories.
Yeah.
But even if we get the data, I'm not sure how that's going to inform our decision making, I guess is all I'm asking, Jennifer. Did you have ideas for like how it would be?
I can
It would-
answer one of
yeah.
those, like, because when we went to having our crime analysts, they could take the information that, you know, because if you don't have that information, we don't know that one neighborhood's been hit by 30 different B&Es, right, for the sake of argument. So it would show you a pattern, like, same thing with arsons, right? Like, if all of a sudden the fire chief starts hearing, oh my God, there was 9 downtown fires or 9 fires over in Labio, if they don't hear about it, we don't know that maybe there's a fire bug, like, it's just
Okay.
one little tool.
Okay, but I don't think we'll get that targeted data that way, but maybe VIU does some research in businesses in downtown Nanaimo to collect some of that information or
I'm gonna go to
something
Ms. Gurry.
similar.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and sorry to interrupt. I
it's
just want to be clear that that online reporting tool is through the RCMP.
Yeah, I said that.
And when you say "we," like, so I'm just want to make sure that that I'm clear and that the committee's clear that when the RCMP is collecting that data, that's not necessarily the city collecting that
No,
data.
but I mean, we get the information as council.
We as, okay, so
Yeah,
you as
sorry, I
council,
should
so yeah, I
clarify
just
that,
want to
yeah.
be clear, so
Like,
council
we
will get
a
that
regular
decision
report, yeah.
to then, okay, thank you.
Kevin, good point, thank you.
Yeah, fortunately, I've never had to use the online reporting tool for the RCMP, so I don't know anything about it, which is great for me. But how linked is that, or is there, could the committee suggest a better linkage between the city, the city and the RCMP work together closely all the time? Could there be a better way for the reporting to happen? I mean, like, honestly, everybody uses an app for everything all the time. There should be a reporting app, a community association could be a link. Could there be some way? And getting a system to talk to another system, is impossible in government. But there's, is there some way that we can maybe have some sort of expedited reporting through an app that's easily downloadable for a small business that doesn't require whatever, or even a password? I mean, these little tiny barriers to reporting, I think, are huge. Because if I want to report something that's a nuisance and I can't remember my password, I'm just not going to do it.
That's a really
Right,
good
I'm not
point.
gonna
No,
send an
you're right.
email and do
That's a good
everything,
point.
so.
Eric, can you address that, what you guys are doing with your online tool? Because I don't have a clue.
Well, obviously, I agree with all the points you mentioned. Like, we're unfortunately a big machine to change. I think Nanaimo detachment would be interested in doing certain things, but unfortunately, it has to be approved by Ottawa. What I can say is online reporting has increased drastically recently, for sure. I even have the stats in front of me. We've seen an increase of 24%. So people are more and more aware that they can report online. And, but to facilitate, I think yeah, I agree, like an app would be easy, but Eric can't make a decision in regards to that, like it would have to be pushed. It's
So-
something we've discussed in the past and trying to make it easier and easier.
So would
but,
that be something that we, as a recommendation comes from this council, like an online app, which I think is a great idea, and then council makes that and pushes it back to your inspector, or we put it to Island District to say we want to see this, and how can we help push that through?
Absolutely, and I think I wouldn't be surprised to see there's other municipalities that have the same concerns.
Yeah.
And looking at different ways to improve communications and improving the online reporting, so, and then we can just go from there and build it up and put requests to Ottawa in regards of.
There's got to be a way.
strategies.
That's,
Yeah.
like
Well,
with
what I
technology,
think-
there's always got to be a way.
I think that's something that we could possibly maybe look at putting in as a recommendation, because, I'm not an app person, but I know everybody else is, like, especially younger generations. So if we could push that, and I think sometimes if one municipality starts it, then the rest get on board. It's also something we could take to the UBCM, not this year because we're going in a week. But, so I would like to maybe have that later as a possible motion, if that's okay. But let's go through this all. So are we good to move on from there now? And we'll come back to assess priorities and motions. Okay, seeing no other questions or concerns, could we please go to, where did I hear, sorry? Ruth?
I'm on the phone here. I did have a question or comment about that section there. So where we were talking about the reporting and statistics and that, one of the things that we talked about at our last meeting that was brought up was the idea of trying to collect information about impacts of specifically the BC housing projects that are being put in. They haven't been put in yet, but there has been some reported anxiety around some of these projects, and even the intensity of how close they are all together in certain neighborhoods. I think that's pretty well documented that there are some community concerns, and the concept of sort of having a baseline for monitoring. And like someone had just spoken about, you're not necessarily going to call the RCMP about something. There are definitely going to be statistics for B&Es, fires that are being responded to, active, increase in shoplifting, theft, that kind of thing. But there's so many other inactive businesses. Their washrooms have to be closed. They have staff that won't work evenings anymore. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many things that don't fall into just call an RCMP or call bylaw that do impact their ability to keep their doors open and remain staffed and to feel safe. And I'm just wondering if there's anything within the committee's scope where we can recommend opening a dialogue with businesses, especially existing businesses in the old city and the downtown core, but also businesses that are going to be potentially impacted by these projects that may bring disorder. And if they don't, great. But at least then we would have some mechanism to collect all of the information.
Thank you. Scott, I just want to go back to something Scott said, where he said maybe this is a possible project for a VIE research thing. What are your thoughts, Scott?
Collecting data is challenging, and people will be reporting things that aren't crimes, and people will be reporting things that don't even exist, and people will be doing all sorts of stuff to get attention to their communities, and so it's something that needs very thoughtful consideration.
Maybe you and I can
do
meet later,
research.
yeah.
But still, I would like this committee to make evidence-led decisions, for sure, but I don't know whether that's possible.
Chief Doyle? Yeah.
One consideration is that, I was just thinking about, is that 911 is, I know it sounds simple, but 911 is typically the funnel for reporting emergency and non-emergency issues in the community. And to some of the committee members' points, some things don't get reported. But one of the risks with creating different reporting structures in terms of emergencies or non-emergencies, and then it could be confusing to people in the community trying to report an emergency and non-emergency, because in terms of whether it's a fire emergency or fire non-emergency, and that's a big basket, that's motor vehicle accidents, that's technical rescue, ice rescue, animal rescue, you know. It all comes into the same basket and then gets distilled down through there through a data collection program, and then it gets dashboarded. In fact, Mr. Middleton's requested a bunch of data, and because it all comes into that one place, I think was able to provide pretty good data that way. So they do run the risk in having two different or multiple systems. Just a thought.
Yeah, I think I was thinking more along the lines of actually collecting information about the impact on neighborhoods versus the, you know, there would be some culture, but we can talk about that later because it is coming up in another bullet point, so we'll go to that. Thank you for telling me, Ms. Curry. So we'll come back to that, Ruth, when we're into the homelessness one, okay? All right, so moving on to the next topic.
Next item is implementing community-wide graffiti removal and cleanup initiatives. And there is a suggestion by staff to invite community policing coordinator to provide a presentation on this topic. And it is identified as being within the committee's scope, in a sense that the committee can provide recommendations on graffiti and vandalism.
Any comments, or Jennifer?
So my pitch for a project or what to cover in the last meeting was a cleanup of a specific area. I didn't see it specifically identified in the work plan, and I was wondering if it got rolled into this item.
It would be potentially considered under this item in a sense that this item is broad and includes a number of initiatives and locations. So there would be an opportunity for the committee members in the future when this particular topic is being considered to bring suggestions and recommendations forward.
Okay, thank you.
One of the thoughts that did come up at our pre-meeting too was when we were looking at bringing the new community policing coordinator in is perhaps that's a committee that the RCMP might want to look at it in conjunction with the city that we used to have, to see if they, I don't know if they have the personnel to do it, whatever, but I know I used to chair that committee, and then Barry did, and we did a lot of work in the city, and Dave was on it, LaBerge as well, or, well, no, Wally, I think you sent. But there was a lot of good work done by that. We had community cleanup days where graffiti was done only on city properties, and, you know, garbage pickup, all that kind of stuff. So it's something I think we can talk about at further length after we do our priorities. Kevin?
Sorry, just a quick question for my own information. The vandalism relief fund that's mentioned in there, I'm just wondering how much of a barrier is that for businesses to apply and receive funding to clean up? Like, is there a lengthy delay, or is it fairly?
No, it's very fast, very easy. But the problem I have with that is that it's only for downtown. And there's a lot of businesses around the city that are getting hit regularly. And I hear that from a lot of them, that they figure that there's very unfair dissemination of city dollars, right? Like, you know, it's you know, they can have, if you have graffiti downtown, you can apply and get stuff, but you can't in other parts of the city. So that's something I think that needs to be fleshed out more.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something we might want to look at a later date in this committee, is how do we flesh that out for fairness across the city?
To be equitable, or at least triaged?
Yeah, yeah, okay, good point. Any other comments, Dave?
Yep, Chair, I can just advise that we've authorized the Chamber of Commerce that administers the grant to take a percentage of those funds for proactive graffiti cleanup on private properties. So we have a contractor that goes around downtown and removes it as they see it, even if it's on private property, so they don't have to make applications.
You good? Okay. All right, anything else on this topic?
May I ask if there's any initiatives with community work orders for people? Do you know if any judges are getting kids to clean up graffiti or
I'd
anything
have to
like
go,
that?
perhaps
Just
retired Judge Cowling might be able to help, because I don't know how we're doing that anymore with community service hours. I've been out too long.
yeah.
There's youth probation and adult probation, and community work service is part of both of them. And it's been 5 years since I've been involved. But when I was involved, and the chief will know as well, that the probation officers seem to be pretty stretched or pretty underfunded. And I used to make those sort of orders. And at one time I was told that we don't have the manpower or staff power to enforce orders under 50 hours. And so, you know, you'd have to get the probation officers to come in and tell you what they're doing. It's as part of the restorative justice. It's a big part of the Young Offenders Act that you do that sort of stuff. But again, and the kids used to work at the recycling center and things like that. Some used to walk dogs at the SPCA. But currently, with COVID, probably shut a lot of things down. And so you would need to get a briefing from somebody that's in the business now. It's the same with fine collection. I don't think the government collects 80% of the fines that are imposed. And I don't know what they do about restitution orders in enforcing them, because it's.
I think that's a really good point, maybe that we could look at it at a later date too, because that could be, again, a recommendation from the committee that we push the government to start funding probation properly, so that we can get these kids not always having to go to jail or get involved in community. Judge?
And also, a lot of curfew orders are not enforced. I mean, the police are understaffed for it, and a big part of bail usually is curfew orders. And I understand there's a real difference from city to city as to how much priority is given to enforcing that. And there used to be a common thing in probation orders about people being clean for drugs, but the Supreme Court of Canada said you couldn't put that in a probation order. So there's not much enforcement about that.
Okay, super. James?
Is it in scope, or is there the potential to look at, I don't know, for lack of a better word for it, acceptable graffiti spaces in public areas?
Acceptable graffiti?
Yeah, like-
That was looked at previously under different councils as well as different committees, and I think the consensus was that it wasn't a good idea because it just caused more issues and problems, but do you remember, Dave?
Through the chair, I think the big concern is legal walls spread quickly onto the adjacent non-legal walls. It concentrates the culture and spreads it into the area.
Judge Count?
At one time, the city had special pillars that people could put posters up on. I don't know I haven't noticed them recently.
We have 2 posters. It's more for information sharing, so people don't post placards on public spaces. There's one on Skinner Street by the Bastion Parkade, and another one at the entrance of China Steps.
So
Kim?
just with regard to that, I traveled, and there are cities that have tourism attractions through their graffiti, and there's vandalism, and then there's graffiti art. So there is room to have something like that and turn it into a positive thing for the city, rather than say take it all down. If you had a space, like I love going through that, we call it the Tunnel of Love down in Cullery Dam, and it's all done, and it's actually quite amazing to see the artwork. And then there's the stuff you're seeing, it's just the taggers and so on, and they're just making a mess. But there are truly graffiti artists, so it is something to
Yeah,
consider.
I know
This-
we really looked at that in 2014, and when they talked to the cities that have that, they did say there were still a lot of issues with it. It actually brought more.
That was 10 years ago.
Yeah,
so-
yeah, but, we can look at it again, but I don't know what our staff thing is to do the reviews, but we can certainly look at it if it's something the committee wants to. Okay, next one.
Next item, or the next theme, is homelessness, addiction, and community impacts. And the item here is establishing baselines and implementing long-term monitoring for the impacts on community safety. And a couple of suggestions are that staff could provide a report regarding good neighbor agreements and service agreements. Staff can provide information regarding the number of calls to first responders and bylaw officers relative to BC housing sites. And they can also provide an update on Travelers Lodge project. I would like to just maybe note for the committee's benefit that these are some of the suggestions. It doesn't mean that those would be the only initiatives. So I think today we're trying to establish the broader ideas, themes, etc., to confirm those, and then there will be annual work plans that are developed each year. So in case that helps the committee contextualize this discussion, I just wanted to mention that. This item is identified as being within the committee's jurisdiction in terms of providing recommendations on residential and business safety based on the data.
One thing I don't understand is why we have traffic-related injuries and fatalities under homelessness and addiction and community impacts. Should that not be under our traffic? for one of the related ongoing, the city plan, the monitoring strategy includes indicators and metrics for traffic-related injuries and fatalities, real crime perception. Or is that just the one spot? Because I don't know why we would have that under homelessness and addiction.
I believe, Madam Chair, that we were trying here to just capture the breadth of the data that is collected by the city. We can certainly review the information provided and adjust the details.
Colin?
Sorry, on this one, as far as the data goes, I mean, it's very difficult to, it's one thing to collect data on the things that the city collects information on, like fires and responses and bylaw calls and police responses, but how that translates to impacts on the community, there's an assumption that's made that that many disagree with, right? Like, so I think right now we're at the stage where what we need is people to actually study the impacts of things like social disorder and these things on communities, because that is not being done by academic institutions, by our governments. As far as I'm aware, other than there was one study done in Alberta on the impacts of safe consumption sites in Edmonton, and then there was a study in Lethbridge that the University of Lethbridge did. The Nanaimo Area Network the Nanaimo Area Public Safety Association has done some of our own data collection on this particular issue, but through a survey, and we're not professionals. So I would think that for something like this, understand the community impacts, what we really need is for people who are qualified to look at this, to actually look at it seriously. Because right now, up until now, it's been your concerns aren't relevant, you're just being NIMBYs, go away.
I find it interesting that Minister Cowan just announced that they're not going to put the supportive housing in at Richmond because of the issues.
Well, yeah, and so anyway, I mean, these things need to be looked at as part of the whole conversation, and I think that this committee can perhaps be an advocate for somebody looking at this seriously for Nanaimo, because it right now hasn't been.
Any other comments on this topic? Okay, moving on to the next one then.
Next item is implementing Housing First initiatives and related best practices to address reduce homelessness. And the staff have identified that this particular item does not fall within the committee's scope. Provision of housing is not consistent with the committee's mandate. And we have also provided a little bit of information about what Housing First approach entails. And that the city works closely with BC Housing to ensure that the province can provide various forms of non-market housing in the city. It's also noted that the city provides support to nonprofit organizations that offer similar services to Housing First supports.
Any comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll go, Scott?
Recently, I've been reading about Medicine Hat, who's done public housing, and they generated the dollars through the city. I don't know how they generate the dollars. I didn't get into that part.
Oh, I
but
can tell you why.
They've eliminated housing, basically, in Medicine Hat, or eliminating homelessness in Medicine Hat.
Actually, if you go there now, that's not accurate. When you talk to the mayor, I was just at,
They must be doing far better than Nanaimo.
they only had 60 homeless people total.
Yeah.
60. And they bring in, but they bring in revenues of over $70 million that they can use from their oil and gas
Yeah.
that we don't have, right? We can only use taxation. No, he asked, he didn't know they're funded, and that's where it comes from.
Yeah. So, I don't know, generating revenue in Nanaimo is maybe something this committee should consider discussing?
We
or-
can't do that under the
no?
community charter, right, Ms. Scurry?
Or advocacy? I mean,
Advocacy, yes.
homelessness didn't exist 35 years ago, and
Oh, I did, but you just didn't see it the same way, right?
It didn't nearly
Like,
to the extent
people used
that
to
it-
look.
that it does now.
There's a really good UN report on one of the reasons of homelessness, that what they see is because of urbanization. Because we took people from small communities where people used to look after each other, put them all in big cities.
Yeah.
And
Well, we
it- yeah.
deinstitutionalized.
Well,
too,
that's a
and
huge
shut-
one.
And
Yeah,
shut down
yeah,
just about
yeah.
every mental health
Yeah.
facility in BC, and then.
And didn't support
we-
the community,
And we
yeah, yeah.
closed down public housing, major amounts of public
Yeah, the
housing. and
feds,
that-
yeah.
And that was bad policy by government, and that's changed the landscape. So I just think that that's something this committee somehow needs to advocate for, even if it's not within our jurisdiction.
Absolutely.
Or talk about, at least. So I'm just upset that it's stricken off of this. a little
Kevin?
bit.
Sorry, just as part of that discussion, is it that the city is not allowed to build housing or that we just don't? Right, like to take a stronger stance, like on a community level, to provide housing? Is it something that we just like to defer to the government because of funding? Or is that something that Nanaimo is prohibited from doing in some?
No, it's
sense?
council prerogative, correct, Ms. Gurry? And also, who's gonna look after it? Then you have to get more city staff to look after all those housing units. A lot of people in this community don't want to see their tax dollars going to that when they say, we don't have good roads, we don't have sidewalks. We have to be worried about water systems, like you see what's going on now with the water pipes across the country. Like, we had our big break here, so we have to go back. I think you're seeing more communities going back to the basics because we're losing critical infrastructure because we're not investing in our critical infrastructure. Hillary?
I guess the first point is about the systems planning organization, which is implementing the Health and Housing Action Plan. And that is a arm's length organization that the city does fund. And so we put $500,000 towards that organization, and they're able to kind of bring more partners to the table and help us on this without the city having to be the one that does it. And they have helped us make a couple of projects an actual reality now. So I would say that is the way that the city is trying to support bringing more housing projects into the city.
And through the chair, I'd just like to add that the community charter, I think is section 8, outlines the core functions and of a municipality. What we can and cannot do, what's within our powers of government and what's not. And historically, my understanding is as to why we don't actually get into development ourselves is we don't have the staffing, so that would be an additional hire. We're not the experts in that, and we wouldn't want to compete with developers. So what we have done is partner with other governments. BC Housing is the province. Partner with them. The city offers the land usually, and then BC Housing hires the developers and contractors to build the housing, et cetera. So we do partner and do what we can in the scope of the community charter and within council's jurisdiction and mandate, but we haven't historically gotten into the development world to compete with other developers. We don't normally compete with other businesses in doing those functions. That's my understanding.
Thank you, Ms. Gurry. Doug? Or, sorry, Colin?
Yeah, it just occurs to me that, we say that that the city doesn't do this, but the city is purchasing the land. So where's the money coming from for the land?
Taxpayers.
Taxpayers. So taxpayers are paying for the city to buy the land that then turns over to BC Housing through an MOU. And so how is it, that sounds like land development to me.
Well, some land we keep some land, others we actually give, right? So it depends on, like, for,
But land is even purchased for the purpose of giving it to BC Housing through these MOUs.
that's correct.
So that is the business of land development.
Well, we're not developing the structures, which then means you have to bring in the support. Like, we're not Island Health,
Yeah.
right? So if we were to do that, if we didn't contract with Island Health, it's like Ms. Gurry.
I want to stick to just whether this is in the committee scope or not, but it is a question of public safety because of the public safety concerns around things like supportive housing units where people are warehoused together that have severe untreated mental health and addictions issues and are preyed upon by street-level drug dealers all the time. And they attract organized crime to those locations. And the city taxpayers are funding the city purchasing land to then be administered by the province. So the province is basically saying, we don't want this headache. City, you take the headache and get your taxpayers to pay for it. That's what it sounds like to me.
Well, I think that's a little simplistic. I think one of the things that people are looking at, right, is the cities, like, you know, we talk about what can the city do to help overcome this, like, and there's a lot of research that's gone into, like, if you house a person, how much more helpful it is, getting them off the streets, getting them in some supports, because these people are gonna be in your neighborhood, whether they're in a house or not, right? And that's something that, you know, when you police, you start to learn. There's absolutely no doubt they're gonna be there. So if you can get some of these people into housing, I think the problem is we don't see a lot of the good success stories, and I think the way the models unfold, it doesn't work well for some neighborhoods, right?
The
So-
issue is that the model apparently hasn't changed yet. They
No.
keep saying it's being phased out, but it's not, and so we need to advocate as a city committee. I'm not gonna belabor it, I'm just saying, like,
No,
from my perspective, issues around housing first, like, I think they're in scope. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do them, because in fact, I think if housing first was done properly, then it would be an effective thing. But that's not what the province is doing. And I think that there is a position that this committee can have in an advocacy level, where there should be something in scope for us in terms of pressuring the provincial government to properly do this. Because housing first to most people these days just sounds like give somebody a place to go and all the problems would be solved. And that's not what's going to happen. So anyway, that's it.
Kim, do you want to add to that, please?
I don't think that it's as simple as give them a house and they're going to get better. There's other supports in place. And I've seen personally success stories out of that. And even one success story out of 10 is better than the person dying out on the streets. And also living in your shed in your backyard, defecating in the streets, leaving their using supplies all over the place, having a place to be, being treated with respect, getting food every day, their health generally improves, makes a huge difference in people's lives. So I think that housing first is not just giving a person a home and saying, see you later.
Okay, so what I
And so
want
we
to
need to
do,
emphasize to the province that that is the case.
but can we come back to this after? Like, we've got a lot to go through. I think we're going to have different opinions at the table, obviously. We can have a bigger debate on that at later today if we have time. Can we move on then to,
Sorry,
unless there's, sorry, go ahead, James.
But is it fully determined then that this is out of scope?
No, because if this committee, will come back to this, if this committee wants to keep it on, that's this committee's prerogative, right? But what we have to, I think the point was, a lot of this stuff is out of our control, right? How the housing model is. We can certainly advocate, we'd like to see a different change in the housing model, like we want to see somewhere there's dry housing, whatever, that type of thing. Dispersion, which is actually all part of our plan anyhow. But the problem being is that it's very hard to find land that meets BC Housing's needs, that's affordable in other parts of the city, because we don't have a lot of city-owned land. And for us to go and spend $5 million is a lot of money to house something, right? The other thing I think that we need to talk about, we're really focusing on addictions here. We've given city lands for seniors facilities, which I think is really important that we talk about that. There's social housing programs, there's NACL, the NAM Associated Community Living, we're working with them so that, like, I think we have to remember there's more homelessness than just those that are addicted, right? And I think that's maybe something for another day and another topic that we could maybe look at, maybe go more in depth, but that might be something that we might be stepping on the toes of the SBO. So I just want to leave this for now, and we'll come back to it once we go through. Sorry, Kevin, you'll be my last speaker on this one.
Just quickly, we could just like change the verbiage on the item under the work plan identified, right, to discuss or advocate or something that's not implement. Because obviously, like, implementing something is out of our scope, because I'm not that good with building foundations personally, so,
Yeah.
you know, but
Yeah.
I think we could leave it in there as an item for discussion or advocacy or something.
Mr. Carr?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So there are a number of items on this draft work plan that speak to the committee's ability to advocate on public safety matters. And within the committee's terms of reference, there is a mention of the committee members being able to raise issues relating to public safety. So I don't believe that removing this particular item precludes the committee from raising public safety concerns. I think that the way that this is presented and appears on the screen is pertaining specifically to this context here, but the committee has the opportunity to raise public safety concerns as part of its discussions.
I'm wondering if we change the implement Housing First initiatives to advocate for, if that would address the concerns, if we did advocate for Housing First initiatives and related practices instead of implement, right? If we did advocate for, and then that can stay within our committee's mandate, if we're advocating for it, and then we can see motions that come from council such as the Travelers Lodge, which I think is going to be very interesting when people actually see the concept around it, why, like, the different types of housing initiatives that we're looking for. And that might be one where if people like what they see with the Travelers Lodge concept, it might be, let's advocate for more of those in our community. So I would, if we changed implement it to advocate for, I think that would address the concerns. Does that work for people? Casey, in agreement? So can we change that to advocate instead of implement?
Well,
And
good.
then- Yeah, it stays within our advocacy role, which is, I know there's another thing on that. So moving on now to, what's our next one there?
We're on page 6. The next item
Yeah.
is providing indoor spaces for unhoused individuals, and this is noted as potentially being within the committee's scope. Overnight shelter spaces are provided dependent on the funding from the province. The city has undertaken advocacy efforts with the province in this regard, but there are limits in terms of what the city can do in terms of providing city property. And the committee will be consulted throughout the process for establishing 2 daytime drop-in hubs to provide input on safety and security elements for the clients and the immediate surrounding neighborhood.
Okay, any concerns or comments on this one? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the next, please.
Next theme is health and wellness. And the first item under this theme involves creating more parks, green spaces, larger riparian zones around lakes and streams, and better access to beaches, green spaces, and swimming locations. So staff have noted here that this particular item would not fall within the committee's scope, as the creation of green space is not consistent with the committee's mandate. The Advisory Committee on Accessibility and Inclusion is also responsible for identifying barriers to accessibility and providing feedback on the city's accessibility actions to implement the city plan and raising awareness on related issues.
Comments, James?
I can't recall if this was part of the conversation, but something that would potentially be in scope is the closing off of public spaces due to public nuisance, right? So how do we incorporate that into this?
Maybe that could be under the CPTED, Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design, where we could bring that up, that that's an issue that this committee doesn't like to see all the barriers, but sometimes where those barriers were put in, we were losing tens of thousands of dollars in pipes. So we had to do something because we couldn't afford to keep doing that. Just for public knowledge, it wasn't always about, because homeless were congregating, it was the damage to city properties and that type of thing. So, but I understand what you're saying, is like, you're talking about like when the fountain was.
The fountain or in
Yeah.
Bowen Park
Yeah.
where the enclosures are closed off.
Yeah, a lot of that comes down to public safety, that's the way that was done.
That's what I'm-
Yeah, okay, I'm trying to think how we can look at that. Ms. Gurry?
I think your CPTED, that's a great place to look at, either opening them and or closing them based on safety concerns, whether open spaces, parks, et cetera, should be closed off and or opened, and when those would be considered, I think would be under the CPTED
And would that
matter.
come under better communication as well, so people understand why it's closed, not make assumptions of why?
Yeah, I
Maybe?
think
I
that
don't
could be something that
Okay.
could come up during that
So
portion.
maybe we could throw that then, if you're in, if the committee's in agreement, throw that under CPTED principles, which is crime prevention through environmental design. Does that work, James? You okay with that? Because it's a very valid point, right? Because I know there was a lot of people concerned about why were they closed, et cetera, and is there ways that we could do it better? Do you have any comments, Mr. LeBerge? No? Okay, thank you. Next on then?
Next item is enticing residents to use public spaces. So consider alternate modes of transportation and staff possibly to provide information on the successful implementation of the night market. So this can be within the committee's scope. The committee may provide recommendations regarding utilization of public spaces related to public safety concerns.
Okay, is there, Jennifer?
So this one.
Can you put on your mic, please?
This one jumped out at me a little bit, particularly the word entice. It makes it sound like, you just have to lure people in. And carrying on from the previous comments, a lot of, this is, I think, one of the biggest community tragedies of homelessness and drug addiction is that people are not comfortable using a lot of our like very, very beautiful, wonderful public space assets in the city. It's been a long time since I've done a little lunchtime walk through Bowen Park. Diana Krall Plaza was pretty dodgy for a while. So I don't think it's a matter of just, trying to, encourage the public to use those places. I think it's now a matter of trying to identify what changes can be made to those places or further enforcement or whatever it is in order to reestablish those places as somewhere that's safe for everyone to go to.
And instead of entice, I think I would prefer the word as well as encourage, because entice sounds kind of.
But it's not even, sorry to interrupt, I don't even think it's encourage. I think it's to make it safe, make it safe for residents to use public spaces.
I think we have to deal with the perception, because there's some people that think that some places aren't safe when they actually are. And so I think it's how do we deal with the perception of crime? And then there are some places where they really aren't safe. So, but we have to deal with people's perception, and what's your perception of safety versus mine could be quite different, right?
Yeah.
So I think, I don't know how, again, if that's like a SEPTED thing or any ideas over at that table there, the expert table? Dave?
Well, Chair, I think the example of the night market is a good illustration. The committee members point down at Krall Plaza when it sits empty, particularly after COVID, then it gets used for other purposes. Busy streets, busy plazas are safe plazas, they're vibrant plazas, and I think really something this committee might be able to assist with is how you can program those spaces for active use through cultural events, community events, gatherings, etc. I think there's a great opportunity here.
Okay, Kim, I think you were going to put something.
Well, I was just going to the same point that you made, is that there's danger and then there's perceived danger, and we've talked about this before. And are you in danger if you see somebody sitting on the sidewalk resting and they're obviously unhoused? Is that a dangerous situation? Usually not. Do you feel uncomfortable? Maybe. I don't feel uncomfortable, and that's just me, as you say. Everybody has their own comfort level. So yeah, we really have to be careful about policing every person on the street that don't look like us, I think is what I'm trying to say, is there's real danger, and then there's the feeling of danger, perceived danger, and we all know the perception's everything, so I don't know how you change that.
I think, again, one thing that they talked about is like when we showed how the night market really brought downtown alive, like things like that, or I don't know if people that were here remember when we had Commercial Street closed, we had all the big chili bake-off and all that kind of stuff. So encouraging the use of public spaces by groups to get people out, I think, is one thing. The other thing, when we talk about considering alternate modes of transportation, this is something I would like to see pushed more, where if there's going to be a big event downtown, and we know there's limited parking, that we work with the RDN again to have buses that they stop at the malls, right? So you park your car at the mall and the bus brings you down. It's like a shuttle service, which really eliminates a lot of the parking issues and it gets people out of their cars. So I think that was what that one was referring to. So I know it was very successful when we used it. I think it was, I don't know if it was one of the days we used it anyhow, and it was really used. And the other thing too was the bike valet program, where then people felt, because people don't want to bring their expensive bikes down if they think they're going to get lost. So can we look at ways that people will feel safe? Well, if I bike down there, we got a bike valet program, I can put my expensive bike there and it's going to be safe. So I think those are ways, if we start, like, okay, this is what's going to happen at this event, we will make, or that we can make recommendations from this committee that when we have a big event, that the committee will, or the city will look at providing bike valet services or alternate means like a bus to get people down so that they're not all relying on their cars. Kim?
Yeah, I was at the bathtub festivities in the evening, and I actually had friends, because they had bike valet service, who rode their bikes downtown, and so they had a great time.
So I think, yeah, Kevin?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's like those special events are great and people feel good if there's a bunch of people gathering for the night market. Yeah, let's all go down to the night market, that's good. But on a day-to-day basis, I find even things like, and maybe council has some influence in terms of like licenses for outdoor patios and stuff like that and expanding the use or maybe making that easier. I find that if you have a whole bunch of people who are street lined with patios and people are outdoors more, even in the winter time, you know, if they can be covered, or I don't know how the licensing works specifically for that. And I know that, you know, liquor in BC is a big giant pain in the ass in terms of, you know, dealing with, you know, taking your glass of wine across the street or something like that is horrible. But I think that if, you know, if we can open that up on a day-to-day basis, that might maybe.
Ms. Gurry?
Maybe educate's a good word, Chair. Educate, like,
Okay,
so if
educate, yeah,
if we
educate
educate the
residents on the
public
use of
on,
public
yeah,
spaces
and safety and what to look for
Okay.
and feel safe and.
Is that, people like that word educate better? I'm gonna start up here first, Doug. Go ahead.
I was just going to reword it to say ensure safe access to public spaces.
No, that's a goal for this committee, ensure safe access to public spaces. Do people like that better? Like, I mean, it's kind of out of our control, but, or work to ensure?
Sure that they feel safe.
Yeah, sorry, I gotta go down to Scott. He's
I was
next.
just going to say, it's interesting in class, sometimes we talk about how people are worried about serial killers and terrorists and the ways that they're going to die, and then they actually realize that the ways they're going to die is cancer and heart disease and car accidents and so on. And so our perception in these places is massively skewed sometimes. So maybe education is something that would be, something that could be interesting or creative or some sort of way, but you're like, you're not going to
Go
get killed.
downtown, don't worry, cancer will get you.
Yeah, don't worry. Yes, go downtown. Don't worry, cancer is going to get you or something, because honestly, our perceptions are skewed.
So, go ahead, Ms. McCarr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just like to also note for committee's information that education is one of the themes identified on page 11, and improving perception of public safety in the city is listed there as an item. So there is a possibility of maybe combining
Okay.
these two items when we do bring this back to the committee.
Okay. I'll leave that in your hands then. Any other comments on this one before we move on? Seeing none, we'll go to night market, which we sort of already talked about, but go ahead.
So the next item we're on page 8 is implementing safety improvements for first responders. And staff have indicated this is not within the committee's mandate. It's an occupational health and safety matter, so it's more operational rather than policy strategic.
Okay, any concerns or comments? Jennifer?
I think it does become a public safety matter to the extent that it starts impacting on, sorry, the word just left me. For example, the situation in Victoria, if public safety is such that the first responders can't attend, then I think it does become a public safety matter. I don't know if that's the point that we're at, but I don't think it's necessarily about the same concern about removing it out of the committee's scope as I do with the other items, but I don't think it's necessarily not in the committee's scope.
We don't have any control though over the RCMP. Like I think when you say implement safety improvements, we can't do that. I think that's the whole thing. We can make recommendations, but even that's without our scope because it comes from provincial mandates, federal mandates, the labor code for RCMP and the provincial WorkSafe code so we can't have any impact on that.
That's a minimum standard.
No, but we
can't do more.
Yeah, but I don't see that as our role. I see that as each organization's role. Like, I know the RCMP wouldn't be happy if you were stepping in on their role. You know, like, I think that's where, sorry, Kevin, maybe you can speak
Yeah,
from
I
your
wouldn't sweat
paramedic.
it, like, as a
Yeah.
first responder,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
we're well covered by our
Yeah.
processes
Yeah.
that ensure safety
Yeah.
with fire and police,
Yeah.
and like, things are flagged appropriately to wait, like, we don't go in on
Yeah.
any hint of a dangerous thing, well, we wait for the police
Like, we're way up
before
there.
fire and ambulance attends and stuff, so,
Yeah.
like, I think if there was something that became like the Victoria situation, I think that would be dealt with,
Through the union.
like, through the organizations that are
Yeah.
involved, but I have confidence in that
Yeah.
anyways, as a first responder, so.
Is that okay?
Well, I'm gonna lose, so I'll
Yeah,
just let it
okay,
go.
all right, perfect. Okay, moving on to the next one.
The next theme is advocacy, and the first item is to advocate for addressing root causes of opioid overdose, public health and safety emergency. This is potentially within the committee's scope. Staff are looking for a bit more information from the committee in this regard. So we have noted that social determinants are within the provincial jurisdiction. There is a possibility, though, for grassroots advocacy at the community level.
Comments from the committee?
Sorry, just a question. What does it mean, social determinants are provincial jurisdiction?
I would
Go ahead,
imagine like
Ms.
health and
McCart.
housing, like social determinants of health, social determinants of housing. Health, yeah.
Yeah, we have no control over health. Maybe Ms. Wood would answer for us at the back, because I see her nodding and speaking to herself.
I mean, I think Colin has said it,
Yeah.
but basically, I mean, the social determinants of health are things that are
Let's go,
more
Colin.
upstream, addressed
It's
upstream.
fine. It's not, it gets picked up.
Yeah, I should say that. So a lot of the things that fall under the provincial mandate, like Mr. Middleton said, so housing, education, health, all of those things are what we consider social determinants of health that set the foundation for people to have really good well-being as they grow out through everything they need to grow up healthy and happy. Yeah.
Colin?
Yeah, I wonder if, I think I may have been one of the people that said this was on my priority list. To that point about the upstream programs that the city does have and supports, I think for this committee, I think looking at the upstream issues around what it means to have what you need, what it means to feel like you're part of a community, what it means to feel included in like having a healthy environment in our city and encouraging that, I think is something that we can advocate for. I mean, the root causes or the root issues of this whole health and safety emergency is obviously something that no city is able to deal with on its own. But it's almost like it's a cultural issue. So I guess like, how do we advocate for improvements to the quality of life here in Nanaimo and in British Columbia, which is kind of at the core of this issue? It's very vague in general, but.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that, actually. I think because, like, we don't have control over any of that stuff, right? Like, we have no control over health. We have no control over the criminal code, any of that kind of stuff. You can do certain advocacy for it, obviously. And again, you're going to come across different opinions. Some people believe you shouldn't stigmatize, other people believe you should. So it's like, is that a role for council to go down? Like,
Yeah, I don't have an answer. I don't know the answer to that.
Scott?
Can I ask what are the root causes of addiction and homelessness?
You're going to find all sorts of answers, right?
Well, but there's some.
You're going to find trauma's
there's
one,
some fairly
social
even ground
pressure.
in the
Yeah,
research,
yeah.
like poverty.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Unemployment.
social pressure.
And unemployment in Nanaimo could be, is that something that attracting businesses that hire people? There's a whole host.
We have a very high child poverty rate. We have one of the highest in the province. So I see where you're
Like
looking at.
hopelessness, despair, some of those other things are the leading causes of addiction. So I don't know if they fall outside our mandate, hopelessness, despair, and poverty.
I'm open to more conversation, because okay, Dave? I'll go with Mr. LeBerge.
Yeah, Chair, I would just suggest that the city does have assets like recreation facilities, and we have programs like LEAP that give low-income families access and connectivity to cultural events, to services, et cetera. I think there are some opportunities here. I mean, food security is another one, although we don't, I think through provisional grants through council, we feed hungry people on occasion, but there are some possibilities using some of the municipal assets that we have.
Christie? Or Ms. Wood, sorry.
And just to build on what Mr. LaBerge said, we also have social planning grants that the council provides, and that is meant to kind of more address those upstream. So looking at poverty, looking at initiatives that support children and youth, food security. So those are maybe some ways that the committee could maybe get involved or advocate for how those grant funds are spent.
Any other comments? This one, I'm at a loss. Hillary?
I mean, I just think there's quite a list of related ongoing projects and initiatives, and I think that I would like to see council being careful to refer anything related to these items to the committee when these items come up, so that you guys have a chance to weigh in and help provide some feedback on it. So not necessarily having the committee drive this work, but giving always an opportunity for the committee with your background and expertise to weigh in on these subjects when they're coming up as decision points for council. And so that's really on council to make sure that we're proactive about flagging what issues potentially this committee will be able to effectively comment on.
So Ms. Gray, looking at this, would it be like to refer more council issues to the committee before final decision? Is that what you're looking at, Hillary?
You could have the committee make a recommendation at the end that they recommend that council consider referral to the Public Safety Committee on matters that involve A, B, C, D. You could look at things like that, and or we could list everything that's under there. But basically matters that involve public safety, if council could please consider referring for comment and or expertise to the
Or
Public Safety
like plans
Committee.
like we do with the ACI, like, because all city plans go to the, which is the Accessibility Committee
See,
before they're
yeah.
approved. So very similar, like if we're going to have a public safety plan.
Exactly,
I
so
guess
public
matter-
safety matters, like that kind of.
Would that be the same as when the RCP brings their annual priorities to us? Would that be something we would want to refer to the committee to look at
And it
too?
doesn't need to necessarily be a referral or a deferral, it could be a, please now share and or go
Okay.
to them for some additional feedback.
I'll
So-
look to you when we come up to that then. Kevin?
I like the idea, but I worry about just adding a layer of bureaucracy that isn't needed. You know, when a plan or something has been ongoing for 6 months and has been considered by experts in council and has been ongoing, to come to this committee for 10 minutes of discussion perhaps might be like, you know, and we only meet twice, you know, every 2 months. And I worry about that. I think you need to
Okay.
find a balance before it becomes just, you know,
So I
honestly,
think
just a bureaucratic check mark that we need to.
maybe we need to do a little bit more thinking to suss this out a little bit more. We could maybe do that, the three of us, to say, okay, this is something, or we could say, Hillary and I, there's nothing stopping us from saying, we would like this particular topic to go to the Public Safety Committee prior to a decision.
Or perhaps maybe I don't think it violates the terms, but like maybe there's subcommittee work to be done there or something.
It's something we'll have to look at. Yeah, I was thinking about that. I need to have that discussion with, go ahead, Scott.
But maybe at the very least, the ones that are on our themes could come to us, if something.
So, well, I'll discuss this after, because I'll get off topic. That's my ADHD showing up. Go ahead, Hillary.
I think that's a really good comment, thinking about how much time we actually have here, but I would just caution you from thinking of yourself like a bureaucrat or from this table as bureaucratic. This is
I've been living by 30 years.
it's a public committee, and that is why you're here. And so I hope that you value your own opinion and your presence here, because it's important, and I don't want to write you off before you even have a chance to weigh in on some of this stuff. But I do think it's important to keep in mind what may just be ticking a box and where you can actually provide some helpful guidance.
And I'm pretty confident that we don't refer stuff just to tick off a box. Like, I mean, when we refer stuff to, and again, I'm just going to use accessibility because it's one that comes to mind, because this one has just started up again. Like, they come up with stuff that we don't think about, right? Like the wheelchair users or those that are blind. So like, it's like here, like we may refer something back. There's a lot of experience, you know, especially if we look at homelessness around this table, right? That we may not be thinking of, that you could bring up, say, well, have you thought about this? Or have you thought about that? Or could we look at, you know, like we've talked about dry versus wet housing. We've talked about different things. Like there's things that might come back to here and say, you know what, this is not a good spot for a seniors facility versus a support. You know what I mean? Like those are things where I think we would look at Brain, like, you know, how does the public feel about this based on your guys' experience and what you're seeing on the streets? We know people here are talking to people on the streets on a regular basis, and their voice needs to be heard too, right? Because it's not just about, it has to be about everybody, right? And then we make decisions from there. Colin?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think one of the things that might be helpful in terms of informing the committee and the committee's membership is if the committee was to be made more aware of the specifics related to these completed projects and ongoing initiatives, or working to help spread awareness of these initiatives with more of the detail, I think, because that actually, some of these things may, from my part, may help our advocacy as well, like in terms of just sharing information with people in the public that are you know, influencers on social media or whatever, right? Like,
That's why we sent all those links out to what the city's been doing, what, you know, what we're looking at doing. And one that just comes to mind, like when we were looking at how to use that youth gang dollars, that might be one that could have came back to this committee, right? Like we have, what was it, $2 million? Or $3.1 million came to Nanaimo for youth safety and guns and violence, right? So that would have been one that maybe could have came here before we did that. Like, you know, Ms. Wood could have came forward and say, these are options we're looking at. What's the committee's thoughts on it?
even getting like a briefing on
Yeah.
on those programs and what they entail and some of those, like how that money will be used, that would be helpful
Okay,
to me.
Ms.
I think.
Ricard? Or Ms. Gurry?
Yeah,
whichever
sorry,
one you-
I'll go first. I think what Mr. Middleton is saying and what I was saying before is maybe not necessarily defer or refer to the committee for a decision, but making sure that they're aware that everything's going on, so being briefed on things of relative to public safety.
So like, it could be like a city report a council report could go to them. So that they see
Exactly,
this is the
so-
same information we got.
Because
Okay.
their awareness and then sharing that information or using that information for their own public safety
Could that be a
benefits, yeah.
bullet point that ensure that the Public Safety Committee gets any correspondence that council will be, not voting on, but that council feels is appropriate for, you'll come up with the wording.
We try to keep up with the council meetings and the minutes and all the presentation stuff, but
Well, it can be
we can't-
lengthy, yeah.
we
So
can't.
Ms. Gurry will come up with something, and Ms. Ricard, I got faith, they'll figure something out. Okay, anything else on this one? Okay, seeing none, let's move to the next one, please.
The next item is request reimbursement of the municipal funds expended on the opioid overdose public health and safety emergency. So this could potentially be within the committee's scope in a sense that the committee through council can advocate to the province, raising the awareness of increased costs of the emergency and safety implications.
Comments on this one? Just so you know, we had the chief do a report for us, and it was around $620,000 for and that's just for the police response to the, fire response, sorry, chief, yeah. The other thing, just so you're aware, this is coming up at the UBCM for vote, because I know Penticton has sent bills to the province, now Victoria's sending bills to the province. We discussed it, but we think the proper way is to do it through the UBCM because the province is not paying. I mean, the other option that we looked at, and this was not one that we discussed at great length, but nothing says we have to go to those medical calls, right? We're not required to do that. The fire department's not required, but we do. So, no, we don't. There's a lot of communities that aren't going anymore because till they get paid, they're not going. And I know that the ambulance, like we heard from the Paramedics Association at the time, that they don't want us going to them because they want to get the dollars so that they can get their more paramedics. And I believe, and Kevin, you can correct me, but I believe that this government has tried to really invest more dollars into getting more paramedics out.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest problem is that we don't have outcome data, right? We know what we send to and we go to,
Okay.
and go to these things, but we don't have good outcome data for how people do with overdoses, right? We don't, I mean, because that's mostly what we're speaking
Yeah.
to, right, is overdose stuff, and we don't have it. So, I mean, you know, do you need to send fire if an ambulance is available, if it's close? Well, maybe not, but that's not practical you need to send everybody because you don't want an unnecessary delay to cause a problem. And so if fire is going to be there first, like happens a lot of the time, then that's what needs to happen.
That's
You know,
why we.
so I don't.
That's why we stayed
I
with
don't think you can
status
get
quo.
away from it, to be honest,
We stayed with
right?
status
So-
quo for that reason. We feel that's a good investment in our public? Because a lot of their calls are not, like, there's an assumption that every medical call for fire is overdose. There's a lot of heart attacks, broken bones. Go ahead, Chief.
Yeah, that's just one thing I wanted to add to what the chair said, is that the cost quoted in the report was for all of our medical aids. It's for the wages for firefighters, an estimated travel distance, so fuel. And we have right down to the second our average time on scene, so it's pretty easily to calculate, and we have an average cost per kilometer for fuel and maintenance, and then first responder supplies, an average amount of first responder supplies used at the incident, so
That's something I would bill back.
Yeah,
Well,
so,
we're looking, that's what the motion is gonna be at the UBCM, so we'll see what happens. But
Yeah.
I would like Chief to talk about, I just lost my mind thought here.
Chair, I was just going to ask the chief if he would clarify from what you were saying, that their attendance doesn't negate the ambulance
That's
from
right.
attending.
But the other point I wanted to say, thank you, is that if there's not, like, people say, well, what happens if there's a fire, we got 4 fire trucks or whatever it costs. So, but Chief, could you explain how you go through that with the supervisor?
yeah, well, there's a bunch of things to consider that. The fire department is, because of the nature of having really large emergencies and smaller emergencies, medical could be a small emergency for the person experiencing it, but for the amount of resources it requires, we have a layer of resources. So a large high-rise fire would require a number of apparatus. That's why we have a number of apparatus. For instance, a large wildfire that they've experienced that we've experienced as well, requires a large amount of apparatus. So when there's a medical call, we still have resources in reserve to respond to other calls. I think that answers.
And also, if your truck has to leave, they can call the supervisor and provide the details, right? And then you can be cleared to leave. But
Yeah.
you must call the supervisor, right?
Yeah, in Nanaimo, there is, once we make patient contact, it doesn't matter whether it's us or BC Ambulance, we have to maintain, or fire anyways, we have to maintain patient contact until BC Ambulance comes. So one of the ways we've managed that is that if there's a delay, and in Nanaimo, we're actually quite lucky to have, in my opinion, I mean, you're welcome to.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's nothing like Vancouver.
Exactly. So we do have, I think, across the board, we have good reasonable resourcing. But if we do have a delay that you've heard of on the news, we call the unit chief and they'll respond, and even maintain that patient continuity until their larger crew can get there. Yeah, I think that's.
Yeah.
I think that there's more, we can talk offline maybe sometime.
But I think it's
there's more
really.
changes
Yeah,
coming
I just think it's really
mitigate
important
that too.
that people know that fire response is not tied up always, like, they can leave with that thing, unless it's somebody really critical, obviously, then they're gonna have to wait. But this council's approved, as a lot of people have heard, 40 more firefighters. One of those reasons is because we were so short compared to where we should have been, especially, like, sometimes, correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, but there might have only been 10 firefighters on at one time, or 12.
In my
whatever it was.
career, yes, but in recent times, minimum was 16. We're up to 20.
Yeah.
But just on a note, medical response, we've been doing it for over 5 decades, I would say. It's also a value-added service. Even if we don't respond to the medical calls, we still need the resources to respond to larger emergencies, so fires, wildfires. The one thing that is often overlooked as it pertains to the fire department response is that it's an all emergencies response. So if there's a dog out on the ice on Westwood in the winter, we respond to that. If there's a high-rise fire, we respond to that. Saturday there was a technical rescue, we respond to that. Hazardous materials calls, we respond to those. So we're called the fire department. Sometimes I think we do a little bit of an injustice. We're more of an all hazards responder, and that's why we have multiple layers of response. So medical calls are definitely value added. They constitute a big chunk of our calls, about 65% of our calls. So there's a lot of medical calls, and of those, we did last year. We did now this is a little bit of an outlier, so I will preface it. We did around 12,000 calls, and around 1,800 were overdoses. Now the year before was just under 700, so we did see a marked increase in overdoses. It's too early to say this year because we don't have a full year's data, but we are seeing it trending downwards. So if we carry on this trajectory, on this trend, we're looking around 1,300 overdoses compared to over 1,800 last year. So we're seeing that, and we're also seeing our calls. And again, we're only, we're just past halfway through the year, a bit past halfway, and we're seeing, probably a little bit of plateauing of calls where we're at around just over 12,000. If we maintain this trajectory, we're at 12,000. So just in terms of the fire service and public safety, that's brief summary tied back to the medical call question. So
Anything else on this one? Jennifer?
So I was interested to know, and I'm genuinely curious, what's the hope that's going to come out of whatever this might look like?
The hope is that the province will start to reimburse us for the medical calls.
Because I was thinking as well, and building on what Chief Doyle said, if it is clear to the public in making this request, there's a dollar figure attached to this. I mean, these things are making news, and your average community member will recognize that this is money coming out of their municipal taxes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a communication and.
That's why we asked for the report at council, so it's available for anybody to go online and look. It was the fire chief did the report on what the costs were for medical calls. Chief?
just one other note. If you read the reports, there's been a couple large provincial reports, one in early 1990s and then one in the I think it was 2006, done provincially. The services have always been, since that time, designed to be complementary to each other, not operate in a silo. To build one service without the other has never really been the direction in the last 30 years, although people may advocate for that. It's just not realistic. Most communities fire departments have taken on responding to medical calls because the provincial service hasn't been able to handle all the calls. And so they have been complementary to each other. They've always intended to be complementary to each other, and separating the two at this point might be tough. So to the chair's note about analyzing the cost and then going to UBCM on it, it's probably a good approach. And so we'll see.
Does that answer your question, Jennifer? Okay. Anything else? Okay, moving on, please, Ms. Ricard.
Next item is advocating for a restorative justice program. Staff have identified that they can provide information regarding success of the school liaison officers program for this item. In terms of the committee's scope, this item may be within the committee's scope. The Connective Nanaimo operates the restorative justice program, so more clarity is needed from the committee in terms of what potential enhancements need to be made to the existing program. There is a possibility to advocate for the federal government to cover the program costs.
And the provincial, they already pay. Scott?
Yeah, I brought that one up because Cowichan operates one that apparently is running a lot more people through it than we are, and they're a lot smaller of a municipality. So I guess I was just wondering why theirs is so successful. And I haven't looked into it more, I'm sorry.
No, it's good.
I apologize, but I certainly could for the committee. But I think they have quite a successful program, and they employ some of our students, and I think they're doing a lot of good in the community for a lot of people.
That's something I sat on that committee, and I was actually on the hiring committee for that as well. I'm very big on restorative justice. I think it does great. You don't want to put a kid to court unless you have to. I think it's a really good program. The issue is the city funds, I think, most of the program right now, if I'm not mistaken, or at least half of it. And the province needs to step up more so to the feds, because there's a lot of mandates and under the Youth Justice Act, right? Like you have to do these other steps first. These programs don't exist. So they mandate us to do all this, but they don't give us the budget to do it, right? So like I think the city takes on, again, this is another role where cities taking on justice, right? So that we get this program, but why isn't the federal government and the provincial government who mandate these programs paying more into them? Or at least increase the funding, so. And if I could get, Eric, if you could just talk a little bit, are you up to speed on the school liaison restorative justice program? If not, that's okay.
Yeah, so absolutely. Actually, I had a meeting 2 weeks ago with the director. Funding has been an issue for sure. They only have one person Historically, they have like 3, even
Yeah.
4.
Yeah.
So they had to shut down for a couple of months in the summer. So then, obviously, we're really encouraging officer to forward files to them, but if there's no one there, there's kind of a no point, right? So obviously, she sent some application in regards of grant from forfeiture to the province. So hopefully she's going to get some funding in relation to that. But it's obviously it's a priority as well for the RCMP, especially in Nanaimo. I think it's a great value for the restorative justice program. But like it was mentioned, funding is an issue. She's been working on it, and we've provided letters of support with grant applications that they have to submit, but the RCMP can support the application, which we've done. So we're expecting, we should know more, probably early 2025, hopefully with funding and moving forward with the program.
May I just add, I do, like in Vancouver, I work with some of the initiatives for restorative justice, and for a lot of the kids, like, it's more impactful and it's more meaningful.
Yes.
And often it's more onerous, quite honestly, than it would be something that they would have received otherwise. So it does work, and it often, if the committees, the circles are organized with various committee members, or community members, I should say, they become more educated on what's going on in their communities, and they become more aware of justice issues, and so it can really have a widespread impact on communities and getting them sort of on the ground with what's going on with the kids in their communities. So, and a lot of them are volunteer run too.
Kevin?
Sorry, I just don't understand, and maybe you can explain it better, what the role of the committee would be in this.
It would be
So-
to advocate for more provincial and federal dollars to help support these programs. Might even be to advocate to the city to give, like, up the, I don't know what our dollar amount is, something I'd have to look into, but I think the role is to use it more so that we keep kids out of the criminal justice system at a younger age and give them a better chance. Because once you throw a kid, and Judge Cowling would know better than I in a lot of ways, once they get involved in the system, like we found in North Van when I was there, this is going back years, mind you, it was a badge of honor to be on probation, right? That's the kids, it was a badge of honor to be on probation, and they all wanted to be. So, you know, you got to change that mindset. And the fact that restorative justice, it connects the victim, gives them a say, which a lot of times they never, ever get. I remember one where a guy had done 35, he's 35 years old, and he'd done string of B&Es, and they actually put him through restorative justice. And he made a connection with the senior whose house he broke into, where he went, you know, he started to be involved in her life and changed his life. Because a lot of them don't realize, they get to hear what their actual impact is. Like, reading a victim impact statement's a lot different than sitting in a circle with everybody. So I just find it I'm with Scott, I think it's got so many good points, and not just for youth, but for other people as well, so.
I just want to find something that's like, is there a specific choke point that we could help to address or
Yeah.
advocate for, you know, in terms
Well,
of funding a position or like co-funding a position,
Yeah.
something, right, that could be specific and not too ethereal for the group
I
to
think
just
too, what
advocate.
I just heard too from Eric is that they don't have enough bodies, and before it used to really rely on volunteers, right? That would be, yeah, I'm gonna do more work on it on my own, and maybe I can hook up with Scott after, and we can sort of see if there is a role for the committee. But I think right now, because I think one of the reasons we put it was just the advocacy to get more dollars to invest into the program. It's another voice to help her, right? If she can show that the Public Safety Committee from Nanaimo or the City of Nanaimo endorses this through this, right? It might help her get more funding, Scott?
I was gonna say, maybe we could reach out to Couchin and see what they're
Yeah.
doing so right, and
Okay.
find out from them or
Yeah,
something. And
okay.
maybe they'd come talk to us about it and
Yeah.
tell us how they're organizing things.
Okay, anything else on this one? Okay, moving forward, please.
The next item is reporting on the details of council's advocacy. And in terms of the committee scope, it's noted that staff will report on outcomes of the committee's recommendations through the agenda process. And staff are working on an advocacy section on the city's website to capture council's advocacy initiatives. And some of these ideas here, I think, are a little bit linked to what the committee has discussed previously in terms of the committee being informed of the actions being taken by council or the opportunities for input, once again.
Yeah, I think it's important that they do have that information, because there's nothing worse than being blindsided. Oh, well, we did that 2 months ago or whatever. So I think it's important that the committee does have the information so they know what's happening. Hillary, you got anything? Any comments on this one, or are we good? Okay, moving on, please, Ms. Ricard.
The next theme is education, and the item here is to improve perception of public safety in the city. And one of the suggestions from staff is to arrange for presentations on the Speed Watch program and Block Watch program. And this does fall within the committee's scope, supporting advocacy work relating to public safety, including sharing of information through various channels. So amplifying messages from the city.
I do have a question for Eric. Is the RCMP doing anything around that? I mean, we came out as being 6th high in the country, right, for the crime severity index. Is the RCMP doing any public education campaigns on crime in Nanaimo or the perception? Do you know?
No,
Okay.
that I'm aware of, but I like mentioned your Speed Watch program and Block Watch program, wherever Reserve Constable O'Brien,
Yeah.
that's been providing training in regards to that, and if asked by the committee, I'll be more than happy to comment to our presentation in regards to whatever programs.
Because I think we talked a lot about the perception, right? So how can we change the perception? I think that's something we need to look at. And that might be something this committee can come up with some ideas on. Colin?
Just on that point, I mean, you mentioned that this report came out that Nanaimo was ranked 6th in the country for crime severity index. I mean, I think one of the things to improve the perception of public safety in Nanaimo is to improve public safety in Nanaimo. That's and I know that perception is different from reality, but the reality is that there is risk in Nanaimo that needs to be addressed. And a lot of there are these issues that we need major support from the province and federal government in terms of policy changes to address that. And I don't know, I mean, the thing about perception of public safety is that what that's saying, when somebody says, well, this is just your perception, it's like your fears are not justified. And unfortunately, many people's fears are justified right now. I mean, a case in point is what happened in Vancouver this morning, where somebody was random attack, killed, and then another person had their hand severed. Random stranger attack, known to police, a lot of problems with this individual, and they're just roaming around. So I take issue right now with focusing solely on perception as if it's the problem of the person that has an issue with public safety. There's real issues around the public being put at risk because of repeat violent offenders, prolific criminals, people with severe mental health and addictions issues that are unabated and are a risk to themselves and others.
So instead of perception, what if we just put in improve public safety in Nanaimo? No, Scott?
No, I don't agree, because there was an attack in Vancouver today, but it will be front page news everywhere, and it will change the perceptions of safety. But and though it's horrible, way more people are going to die of traffic accidents today than they are.
So we should just disband this meeting.
Hang on.
So I'm suggesting we
let
align.
you speak.
I'm just suggesting
We
we
need to be
align.
respectful.
We align perceptions with reality. So I agree with you on both things. We need to deal with the impacts of crime and community safety in Nanaimo. We also need to talk about perceptions of community safety in Nanaimo. The two can't be separated from each other in my mind.
I think it goes to a point that Kim made earlier too, right? Like, seeing somebody passed out on the street is not necessarily a threat to you, but some people will feel it is, right? Like, and it's, how do we deal with that so that you know what the real threats are versus the perceived threats? And there are real threats, and I agree with that. Like, I've seen them, I police this community, of course there are. The problem when the CSI comes out, we had last year a number of homicides which threw our numbers way up, but those were targeted. There was one random one, right, down at Matthew Sutton, I think two random ones. But the majority are targeted, right? So but those still put oh, it's so unsafe. But when you find out that 4 of them were targeted, most murderers are not a threat to public safety. They're a threat to their domestic partner, and they're a threat to their organized crime partners. Like, there's not a lot of random murders. Yes, we are seeing some because of mental health, right? So that's where we need to push that government. Let's get the mental health stuff in place so that we can get these people, for themselves, to be safe as well. It's a really fine balance here, right? Like, because I agree with you. People's perception is very important. And like my perception as being a former police officer is going to be a lot different than probably Hillary's, because I know what to look for. I know cues that I'm going to look for. I know how to defend myself more. So it's going to make a difference. Kim, having dealt with a lot of the homeless people, she's going to know, okay, I know this guy's a problem, but I know this one's not. Or, you know what, when he's off his meds, he's a problem. When he's on his meds, he's doing really great. So, but I know you're talking about the general public and the general person, and that's something, how do we deal with that so that we can make them feel safer? How do we get the messaging out that we're not happy with some of this stuff? And what, like, the prime example I think that you're referring to is like, when we saw what happened on the weekend, that guy's criminal record and his things is huge. Why was he released into the community? And that's where we can push again to support the province. And Mr. Eby has been Premier Eby's been front and center. We want some of these people held, right? Like, we have to get that act changed so the people that are a real threat to society are held instead of being released into the community.
And I think for the public doesn't know which individuals are a problem and which ones aren't. They don't have that information.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's why I think perception's important.
So people perceive as people, it's natural for people to generalize and to think, I'm just going to avoid these areas. I'm just going to go away and whatever. And, you know, again, I mean, I think that focusing on the perception of public safety in Nanaimo is not from my point of view, is not a useful use of my time. Like, if I'm going to volunteer for this committee, I want to focus on the actual hard issues of really trying to wrestle with the root issues of a public health and safety emergency we have. I'm just not interested. And for my part, like, I won't participate there very much in conversations like this. But I will say that I do find it somewhat offensive that we're sitting here in Nanaimo talking about how you're more likely to die of stress or cancer, when we're sitting at a public safety committee that we could just disband if the real risks aren't really there.
I don't think that was Scott's point. I think Scott's point was to say, people don't think of the great big picture, right? Like, you know, like, he's not saying, well, I'll let Scott speak for himself after, but I don't think that was intent of that comment at all.
I think there's a distinct possibility that fear of crime causes a lot of problems, and so does real crime. And I know it causes stress. People are worried about going out at night. They're going places at night. And to me, that's a public health issue. That's a public safety issue. But I'm definitely not suggesting that we shouldn't focus on the actual impacts of crime either. I wasn't saying that by any stretch.
Jennifer?
I think what I would like to see on this point is where there is a perception that is perhaps incorrect. So, for example, the night market is awesome. It's fantastic. It's been a huge success. I think there was a picnic event as well.
Yeah.
You know, those are just kind of incidents, circumstances and initiatives that I'm aware of. I'm sure there's others where the perception in the community for, you know, certain things that the city has dealt with, or maybe they've changed, that is incorrect. I think trying to correct the perception in those circumstances would not be insulting to the public. I agree with Colin's comment that if you're saying to somebody, you're wrong, that you feel unsafe walking down the street when there's a lot of people that you perceive as scary. I don't think I think that's insulting to the community. I don't think that's the way to go about it. But if there are opportunities for us to correct a perception that's incorrect, or to promote those situations where safety has been a priority and where the city has made strides in creating that atmosphere of safety, I think that we should work on advertising and promoting those.
I think that's a really good point, because a lot of times, like, I follow a lot of different social media groups, and there's misinformation in there, and I feel responsible for correcting some of it, and that comes from, no, here's the actual police release, right? This person wasn't known to the police or whatever, like, things like that are important, that the correct information gets out. You know, like, you hear rumors, oh, well, this guy was a homeless guy, and then you find out, no, actually he wasn't, he was actually known to him, it was his girlfriend or it was boyfriend, whatever, right? Like, it's really important that whatever facts we have to dispel rumors get put out. So I think that's a really valid point. But I think that, because you're right, like, I don't think you can tell somebody that, like, and again, it comes down to what you're personally comfortable with. Not everybody's comfortable in certain situations, others are, right? So, and to tell somebody that your perception is wrong is wrong. I agree with that 100%, because your perception is your reality. It's really important that we do oh, sorry, Ms. Gurry.
No, that's okay, Chair. I don't want to interrupt. I was just
No,
making sure you
no.
saw. Again, I was just thinking around the perception idea rather than using that word, perhaps education. So those that may feel safe or may not feel safe, if they're educated with what they should be aware of and or, travel in groups, make sure you're walking in well-lit areas, like education around what is and isn't perceived as safe or is not actually safe, and advocating, like was just mentioned, for those activities and events that carry on in Nanaimo, such as the night market, that are considered mostly safe. Because there are going to be incidences regardless, that bad incidents might happen no matter how safe they're perceived or not perceived to be.
Like, an education campaign is as simple as lock your car door so that stuff doesn't get stolen, right? Anyhow, I'm gonna go down to Kevin and then Hillary. Oh, sorry, James.
Yeah, sorry, I was going
apologies.
to recommend changing it to understanding. I
that's
think
good.
what you recommended, I'm not opposed to
Yeah.
that, but it's not necessarily to what Scott was getting at about, I don't want to speak for you.
Yeah, I
but-
think understanding the perception, that's a
Yeah.
good one. I think that hits everybody's, what do people think of understanding the perception?
Improve understanding,
Improve understanding.
public safety in Nanaimo. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great.
I would not want people to think that our committee is trying to paper over the
Yes,
reality of the
that's
situation, but I
right.
don't think
Yeah.
that's what
I don't think that was the intent, but I think that hits it. What about, like, improve the understanding of the perception of public safety in Nanaimo? Is that?
I would just leave perception out.
Yeah, sure. I agree.
Is everybody okay with that? Okay. Any other comments on this one? Hillary, did you have something?
Yeah, like, I guess my question is, how do we do that? Because we, as a committee, we're not a marketing organization. We don't have communication people who work specifically on behalf of this committee, and it wouldn't probably be appropriate to be putting something out just on behalf of this committee. That's not usually the way that committees function. So we would be like making a recommendation to council to then support that through the city's communication plan.
I think that's something that Mr. Burgos is looking at, because they do monitor Facebook sites on a regular basis, and they do correct misinformation.
No, Chair,
No?
sorry, no.
Well, somebody's on there doing it from the city, because I see it
On
quite
our city
often.
page, we will correct
Yes.
information on our
Yes.
city page, but I
Yeah.
would not, staff could not and would not, and it would be very, not good for their mental health either, to go on to
No, I mean,
other
when it comes to their
Facebook sites
intention, they're
and
putting
read those
out the
comments.
actual stuff that actually happened, right? Like, we changed the AP, for the Public Works, we actually changed all that so people could find the question so that it was there. Instead
Yeah,
of
so
yeah.
we do like misinformation that we
Yes.
have noticed that is out there or that has been
Yeah,
brought to our
sorry.
attention.
Yeah,
We
that's
will
what I
like
meant, yeah.
update frequently asked questions,
Yes.
but we do not comment on other Facebook
Oh,
pages.
that's
And
not true, but we'll talk later.
well, the city of Nanaimo does not.
Colin?
Yeah, I was just going to say on that, like how you would go about doing that. I mean, I think the presentations that are provided to this committee are helpful. And I think that because these committee meetings are public record and they're available, the video recordings are available, like those can be shared on social media as well. I mean, I think one of the ways that we could do that is through this venue for getting staff or getting presentations about different programs on public safety. Those recordings can be segmented and posted online, whether it's YouTube or whatever, because then that gets shared.
They are already on the
They're
YouTube.
segmented as well?
What do you mean segmented?
Like, if you wanted to fast forward to a
Broken down.
particular part of the
Oh,
reporting, you could
yeah,
just-
you can go through.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So I think the other thing too that we have to look at is some of this does belong to the RCMP, right? Like it's their job to educate on how to prevent crime, et cetera. So I don't know if we could do a linkage to some of the RCMP press releases that come out that could go to the city website that, like I saw Gary just did a lock your doors thing or whatever it was. Is there a way that that could be added onto our page as well so that it's all there? Because people don't want to go to like 5 or 6 different websites to find the same information or. and I gotta go to
We
Kevin?
coordinate quite often with the RCMP communications
Yeah.
on sharing their
Yeah.
tweets and/or
Yeah.
getting those things out when and if
Okay.
necessary,
Thank you.
for sure, yeah.
Kevin?
Just as part of all of this, I find it, I don't think it's a zero-sum game in terms of trying to change public perception or improve it, as well as address, the root cause of that, like the actual problem. I mean, there's room to do both, but you do need to recognize that, like, things regress to a mean, right? So to chase an outlier like a guy in Vancouver today doing stuff, it's like, well, that's because it's new that's in the public mind, right? So, you can't just chase that down and see that as a big threat to public safety when, yes, that one person is, but statistically over 10 years, you want to change the mean and you want to change like how much there is every year, how much crime. You don't want to like chase one specific thing and try to change public perception because scary things will always be scary, right? I think that when we look at the public perception, I think there's room, I don't know, something I struggle with in this committee a little bit is, well, first of all, I always have to fight my centrist tendencies one way or another, it seems, the whole time, is I think that, I don't know, I try to be very aware, and I've learned this from my sisters, I'll give her some credit, is that, we're like 12 white folks standing around talking about the homeless people because there's this group over here. And I almost wonder if when we talk about perception and stuff, if there's more room to look to advocate media campaigns or something like that. I mean, there's no reason why you can't go and interview, some of the homeless people, and present them to the broader community. Maybe there's ways to actually bridge a gap a little bit more that we don't do, because when we look at things in terms of the city and the website and information that's out there, that's only there if you go looking for it. And the people that go looking for information on a city website are a particular subset of people, right? It's not very outward facing, right? It's very sort of inward facing. And I wonder if there's ways to recommend that we, use, like, everybody reads the Nanaimo News. The paper comes every Wednesday. I just do the beefs and bouquets personally because I find them hilarious.
Me too.
But I think there's a lot of room there to introduce different members of the community that don't always have to be, a shop owner. They could be, somebody struggling with something. I just wonder if there's ways that we could try to maybe, and I think this speaks to the broader perception in the broader area that, hey, you know what, this isn't really the issue where we need to worry about public safety because this person's unhoused. We need to worry about public safety because this person has, warrants and has been arrested 30 times and stuff like that. And then, and maybe, I don't think we do a good job of putting what's going on out there to people around, initiatives by the Mounties and stuff like that, so.
Yeah, I think there was just a really good article that the police talked about, like that new program that they have where they are targeting the chronic offenders, like, so we need to get more of that out. The other thing that came to mind when we were talking about that, when you're talking about the random attack today, most of those random attacks are people with severe mental health problems. So this is where this group can do it, more advocacy to get the mental health supports in place so that these random attacks aren't happening, right? Like to get these people their supports, because most, at least recently, the ones I've read about they do have severe mental health, or they're schizophrenics, they're off their meds, whatever. So you look at that. The other thing, when you talked about like the pieces, I would like to see BC Housing start putting out some good success stories so that people can understand, because you don't know, is there a success coming out of these places? We don't even know, right? Like how many people are doing well in these, how many aren't? Like we need the true facts in order to get, and that goes back to what Scott said about, you need the data to support people's beliefs. Sorry, Ruth. Welcome, by the way.
Thanks. BC Housing, I can't find statistics on how many people are being 2 years in, 3 years in. Are they in the same supportive housing units? Are people moving on? Are there, other than like an anecdotal success story, those statistics aren't available. In terms of like overdose fatalities, the large percentage that happen indoors, how many are happening in supportive housing, BC Housing, there's just a dearth of information. You can't find anything. And I think that when there's a lack of transparency like that, it really doesn't look good. And that is something that we need, and I would love it if we could get more information from BC Housing about what is happening or not happening in those places.
I think asking
Destiny?
for statistics on success stories in BC Housing is difficult because it's gonna depend on what you consider successful. Do you consider someone getting off the street and living in housing for a year successful? Because I do. Or do you only care if someone is housed for the rest of their life and never goes back on the street? Because that's also successful. But if somebody gets off of the street for 6 months, happens to suffer a fatal overdose in their unit and dies in their housing, they didn't die on the street. So that's still successful. They didn't have to die alone outside. Or would you prefer they did? Because then
No, I would
Okay,
prefer they
let's
didn't.
not go down this way.
Yeah, I don't, because,
We're
yeah.
gonna come into different viewpoints. Everybody's got a different viewpoint on how we deal with that. Where I'm talking about for the BC housing things is you've got some people in there that don't need 24-hour supports because they've done so well. Why aren't they moving them to the next stage where they don't need 24-hour supports and maybe only need supports 3 days a week so that it would lessen, then you could get more people in? I think that's like, it's the.
there's not enough housing to move.
But that's because they're not doing it. And we have these conversations with BC Housing an awful lot at our table saying, you know what? You're spending all this money for 30 people to sit in a supportive housing unit that don't need 24-hour supports. Move them to the next stage, like build one for them, then you can get the other ones that need the 24-hour supports. And that's what they're doing in other provinces, and it's much more successful. And the minister said they are looking at that. So like, I think that's what people are talking about. Like, I know one woman that's been in a supportive housing unit that doesn't want to be there, but there's no place for her to go, right? So like, if we could build something so she doesn't have to have that 24-hour support, so she could go there, which would cost the taxpayers a lot less money, but she still needs supports, but she doesn't need 24/7. I think it's, again, it comes to the philosophy is the phased housing approach. Scott?
Often the research does exist. It's just whether people are reading it too. Like, it might not be specific to the issues in Nanaimo, but I guarantee you there's research of transition through housing that's gone on in BC at some graduate level or something, but it's hard to find and no one's got access to it. And who's got access to all the journals at VIU or whatever to read that research? So I don't know if it's always an issue. We need more data as much as we need to educate people to start caring about the data or reading the data or giving some of that
Or maybe
information.
showing them where it's found.
Even when you said that the crime severity index in Nanaimo is higher, is sixth highest.
We're sixth in the country.
And that people don't understand that statistic is driven by outliers like homicides, and that statistic, reporting has increased dramatically and it's changed now, so that's changed the statistic. And so understanding some of those things are important to making real sense of the data to make decisions based on evidence.
Okay, we got to get back on track because I let us go off track there on the education piece. So do we want, look at that, the way that the judge said that comment, understanding? Everybody's happy with that change? All right, now we need to go back, I believe. I think we're done them all. And look at priorities for where you want to put it, high, medium, and low.
I just identified all of mine as high.
Okay.
I went through and scored.
Doug?
I'd just like to say that, you know, all of us would have our own sort of favorite priority, but it's a new committee and the council established us. And, you know, I personally would defer to what you and Hillary and Sheila, for example, felt that the council would want us most effectively to work on. For example, closed circuit cameras is something that we could talk about a lot, but the city probably has a plan about it, and maybe the best use of us is when they've got their plan, they refer it to us to say for comment on. But I really, we don't meet that often. We don't have all the background facts. It's a new committee. It'd be nice to be successful, sort of, and get off to a good start. And maybe the most effective use of what we do is what the staff and yourselves point us in the direction of. You know, and pick 3 things and say, go with
Ms. Gurry?
that.
your thoughts? Like, I think that's actually probably a really good idea, that council see what the committee, because you're right, we could just say, these are the top committee, there's like 10 things, I think, something like that, and then bring it to council and see what council sees as their priorities, Ms. Gurry. Is that agreeable to you, or what do you think?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think that was like a really great idea. I'm just thinking, yeah, if we already have one member saying that they've rated everything as a high priority, and that's kind of the feeling and notes I've gotten from the committee today on each of these items. So I think we could take the feedback that we received today and develop the work plan, as well as bring the information to the committee, either from staff that they're already working on that has been noted in the related ongoing or completed projects/initiatives column, as well as having council defer and or recommend presentations or information getting to this committee could be worked out and then brought to you at your next meeting. I was going to also suggest the advocacy efforts that came up today, advocacy initiatives that you would like to take on, where it was not really in the committee's scope, but advocacy could come up as the item came up on your agenda. So as the agenda item came up, rather than motions today, that it would be part of the recommendation brought to you by staff or in your agenda that the committee recommend advocacy for A, B, C, or D, or, a letter come from the committee to be approved by council for advocacy on this item or that item. I was just thinking that might be, rather than making a bunch of motions today about advocating for A, B, and C, that they come up as the item comes up and is shared and discussed at the table. But those are just my thoughts.
And then just so the committee's aware, we do have a meeting with the Solicitor General, Minister Farnworth, when we're in the UBCM. And I think one of our topics is repeat offenders, and to increase, we want to see more increase in the RCMP budget to go towards that targeting. And so just so you're aware, that was a top priority for council. Kevin?
Sorry, just in terms of prioritizing, and I agree, it's kind of hard to choose.
Yeah.
Maybe, I guess the only thing I would say about having council come back and identify the priorities is sort of, to what degree is this committee supposed to be a little bit at arm's length, or more sort of driven by the community and less by council in terms of establishing the priorities? So maybe, a simple Google poll, please rank these 10 things in order of priority. It comes up, crunches the numbers, and it might just, if everybody takes the time to just sort of rank their priorities and then we collate that information, it might sort of do it pseudo-anonymously, but everyone just have the chance to think about it and do it, before the next meeting in terms of ranking those priorities, just based on that.
I think just the one reason that I do see the counseling is because of the budget implications, if we need more staff, et cetera, because we are starting into budget soon. So, I don't know. I'm going to defer to Ms. Gurry, what her thoughts are. And I agree with what you're saying, that it's supposed to be driven, but this is driven by the committee because we picked what we want. But then council could come back and say, well, we know this is coming up, that's coming up. So could we have the committee focus on this? Because if we do need to add budget, I don't know. Ms. Gurry?
I think rather than having council decide your work plan, though I will say that this is a committee of council, so it's not really arm's length. You make recommendations to council and they actually say whether you go forth and do them or not. So you are a council committee rather than like an arm's length organization type thing. So I would just say that. But what I would suggest is, rather than them deciding your work plan, is I think you have decided your work plan today, like by going through each of these items. I think a number of the things that we've garnered is where they weren't necessarily within the scope. The wording's either been changed to make it sort of in the scope or mandate, and or advocacy, which can always be within the scope of this committee, is to advocate. So taking this, staff could take a crack at prioritizing what we've heard today and what our abilities are able to bring things forward to you. Things that have already being worked on and already been done shouldn't be that difficult to bring back to the committee for information and information sharing, but new initiatives would be based on staff time and priority. We could take a try at that, bring it to the committee, have council approve that, and move forward with that being your work plan. I think that that might be a good idea. You would have the opportunity to see what we've come up with before council approves it. And hopefully they do approve it, and then we could move forward with that being, what we're going to continue on in this year term.
I think that's a good point, because we do have staff capacity issues, obviously. What do people feel about that? Jennifer?
I think that's a great idea, and I wonder if when we get it back, I mean, we can always kind of look at what, let's say that council identifies, 1, 2, 3 as things.
Well, it's just going to be staff, it's not going to be council if we do this way. We'll let
Okay,
staff do it.
Staff then.
Yeah.
Identifies 1, 2, 3 as things that are pretty likely to be successful. As a committee table, we can always say, well, wait a second, we really wanted number 15 is super important, here's my pitch, and then,
Okay,
right?
yeah, that works. Ms. Gurry, thoughts?
100%, because we would just be making recommendations. We wouldn't be deciding. So we would bring forward our ideas, and you would decide the options presented to you and how you'd like to proceed.
Thank you. Scott?
I worry that there's something that we're missing. Like, I do worry about that. Like, there's something that should be in here that isn't here that's like a glaring omission. And maybe if staff has any suggestions or things that they think that should be part of that we've completely just glazed over that you talked about, that would be helpful for us to consider at least as something else.
Madam Chair, we can certainly consider that as part of staff's discussions following this meeting as we prepare the updated work plan for the committee's consideration. And maybe just a note that once the work plan is adopted and goes into the implementation, we're talking about the overall term work plan for this committee until 2026, but there will be also annual work plans that are informed by these discussions. And there is an opportunity to come back at a later time and add additional items should the committee wish to do so, and should staff have further recommendations.
Scott, and then Kevin?
No, I'm done.
I mean, sorry.
Sorry.
Colin.
Yeah, what you said there made me wonder what happened to sidewalk and traffic safety. That was originally, I think we had some discussion over in the last couple meetings about it being in scope of this committee.
I think that was under, not transportation.
I don't recall.
Yeah, I
there
think
being-
that would be items referred by council. I think Hillary's right on that. So if we get, because we get so many requests, but part of the problem is when you talk to engineering, it's just not doable. We don't have the budget, it's not doable, period.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I mean, it's just, like, it's 3,000 per meter, right, for a sidewalk
Yeah.
now.
Okay.
And it's so we actually have that tool that's used, so it's not political, it becomes use that tool.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So I had Kevin?
I was just going to say, in terms of the work and prioritizing it, I mean, this is still a committee meeting. There's always rooms for other matters and new business
Exactly.
in the orders. So you can always bring up,
100%.
this
Yeah.
doesn't limit us. You can always
No.
bring up new things.
Yeah, this is our work plan but you're right, like if something happens that people hear about in the news or whatever and you're concerned, ask for it to be put on the agenda. Like, it's really important if you come up with something like, like Scott was saying, are we missing something? When you go away, sometimes you might think of something or somebody might say something to you, oh, I was watching your meeting, what about this? Put it forward as an agenda item. Yeah, it's really important. Okay, any other thing else? Any other discussion before we adjourn? Any questions? Okay, seeing none, motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Kim, seconded by Scott, all in favor? Thank you. And I just want to thank everybody. It does become emotional because some people are living with this every day and their kids are scared to leave their house. And so we all have different lived experiences, but we have to remember to be respectful to each other. I think that's really important. And it's, everybody's here because we want to make a difference in our community. So we have to remember to focus on that.